Welcome to the ERW podcast. Today we will be discussing Liberia. My guest here is Mr. Carlos Wallace Jr., a Minnesota-based businessman, policy practitioner, a communication specialist of Liberian descent, CEO, Hopeville Homes, Home Care Services, LLC, Executive Director, Carlos and Kiko Smith Foundation, Commissioner, Human Rights Commission of Robbinsdale, professional experience, Information and Communications Manager, Firestone Liberia, Government and External Relations Manager, Firestone Liberia, Human Resource Manager, Empire Systems Home Care, Minnesota, Board Service in Liberia, National Social Security and Welfare. This is just a little bit of this man's background. Wallace, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Mr. Wheagar. I appreciate the confidence you repose in me to come and discuss such important issues. I appreciate it. Thank you. I look forward to rewarding discussions.
Awesome. So we are discussing Liberia today. Imagine a country that was founded by free slaves from the U.S. And those free slaves were the minority in power, in prominent positions that provided sort of a rule over the majority indigenous Liberians for over a century. And Liberia actually eventually became an intelligence hub during the Cold War for the U.S. and allies. So we're digging in today. We will be digging in on Liberia's history, where Liberia has been, the Civil War, and some nuances that people still do not understand. So, Mr. Smith, let's hit the ground running. First question, was Liberia an occupied country, or was it a country founded, actually? What was Liberia like before the free slaves left from the U.S. in 1821 to get to Liberia? What was Liberia like? I understand it was called the Green Coast or the Pepper Coast, and there were activities going on, there were government in place. So please let us know, what was Liberia before the free slaves went to the country or to the region?
First and foremost, let me just make it clear to your audience that I'm not a historian, but I'm a history enthusiast. As far as my knowledge goes, prior to the coming of the settlers, the area that is now Liberia was a collection of tribal kingdoms. So these were not people that didn't have governmental structure, didn't have organized society. And it is arguable that there were some attributes of their society, culture, government, institutions, that may have been better than the ones that were imported. But we would need to understand that for over 100 years or more before the settlers came, these were communities, these were kingdoms, these were societies that were thriving. The settlers were not the first outsiders that they met. They had interacted with the Portuguese, they had interacted with the British and other people. Trading. Yeah. As a matter of fact, that's the reason why when the settlers came, they were shocked to hear names like Peter, King Long Peter. They didn't give those people those names as some people think.
Those were names given those are names that indigenous Liberians
already had before the settlers came. So sometimes people think, well, the settlers came and because they couldn't say the names properly, so they just give them names. No, those people had those names. A lot of King Peter, King Long Peter, and all of that. Those people had those names prior to the coming of the settlers because they were interacting with the West prior to the arrival of the settlers. So, for example, there's a character in Liberian history called John Mill.
John Mill.
Yes. So Mill was one of those people that interacted with the settlers when they came. As a matter of fact, he is credited with giving Providence Island to the settlers. Now, Mill was the son of an indigenous Dane Bassa woman and British slave trader. So he was mixed. The father, may have been an anomaly during those times, but he talked to his son, even though he would have been considered black.
Okay.
But he decided he would educate his son, so he sends his son to England. The boy goes there. He goes to school. He gets well educated, and the old man may have retired and sent his son to continue the business in Liberia. And so he comes home, but now he has a different mindset from his father.
Okay.
Because his father is white, is Western, probably don't have the compassion and empathy for these people. They were just objects of trade for him, but they were humans.
Okay.
His son didn't feel like that because his mother was one of those people.
Okay.
He had uncles there. He had cousins and relatives there. So John Mill comes and he decided, now the slave trade is not something I want to continue, and I can trade in other goods.
Okay.
But Providence Island, I understand, was his property. He had inherited that, and he allowed the settlers to possess that property. But here was a guy that was there speaking English.
So
He
John
had gone to England and had gotten educated.
This is before the
No,
settlers,
the
before
settlers
the African Americans left Liberia to go into Liberia to settle and to form the country or to found the country, so to speak.
Correct.
When we have John Mills and other guys in there who already had travels into Europe and other places.
John Mill was not an Americo-Liberian. He wasn't a free slave. He was never enslaved. He wasn't a settler. John Mill was dead when the settlers arrived. He was the son of the indigenous people that owned the land. And so he was a landowner.
Okay.
So he was there. He was part of the existing society.
So this is pre-1821. We're talking here.
Yeah.
1822 is when the settlers, the African Americans, left here to go to Liberia.
Right. Well, in 1822, the first ship that left, which was the Elizabeth,
Okay.
that would be Liberia's equivalent of the Mayflower.
Okay.
That ship went. It didn't come directly to Liberia. That's the confusion that there was. That ship docked in Chevron Island.
Sierra Leone.
And most of the people on there, went on to Freetown.
Okay.
I believe the leader on that ship was Reverend Coker,
Okay.
Daniel Coker. So, and a lot of them died on Chevron. People died on Chevron Island, but most of the people that came on that ship that went on to Freetown.
Okay.
Right. There were subsequent ships that came to Liberia throughout that period between 1822 all the way up to the late 1800s. There were different waves of settlers that were coming.
Okay.
But when they arrived on Chevron Island, and the original intent was to go on to Freetown. Why, go and get a new settlement.
Right.
When there was already a settlement in Freetown for repatriated, free emancipated slaves.
Okay.
But remember, that's the settlement in Freetown was under the aegis of the British government.
Okay.
And this group that was now repatriating citizens, free slaves, emancipated slaves to Liberia, they were under the American Colonization Society. So the fact that they were all free slaves didn't necessarily mean they were entitled to the settlement. And the British government made it clear to them when the British government refused for subsequent batches of free slaves that came to settle in Sierra Leone. When they refused them, they were stuck on Chevron, and they decided to find an alternative place.
And that was Liberia.
And when the sail eastward, they found Liberia. They arrived on Providence Island. They found a place. They sent an expedition. All of them didn't come.
Okay.
The rest of them sailed on Chevron. They found a place to be suitable and all of that. And then once they done that, they talked to some of the local people there, males, and then they went and got the rest of the people when they came to Providence Island, right? I think in Liberian history you hear about people like John, Kizzle.
John Kizzle.
Yeah, who was kind of sort of like an interpreter.
Okay.
Helping, in the, between the settlers that came and the natives that they met there. But just to shorten this story, they negotiated. They didn't want to stay on. Providence Island is a small place.
Right.
But they were there, and then the goal was to come on shore up to Cape Monserrato.
Okay.
That's where you have Monrovia.
Right.
And they negotiated with the locals, the leaders, and all of that. But and they were under the impression that they had an arrangement, but the locals made it clear, "No, we don't. You don't. So you stay where you are, and don't come up here because this land is not yours." But they tried to meet with the locals a couple of times. The defining meeting happened between Captain Stockton, I believe that was his name. He was the military guy that was sent from the U.S., to make sure that things happen. Find out.
So there was some resistance
Yes.
from the indigenous
Absolutely.
folks there because they already have organized government, they already have social structures in place.
Mm.
So when the Americo-Liberians left here and went in there, they met some resistance because you already have a country in place.
Yeah, not country in the sense that we would define it, so
Our society, so to speak.
right.
Okay.
That had organized society, that had well-developed civilizations, so all of that. But Stockton went with some of his men, and they went and to the seat, the native kingdom, where they met the leaders, and they had their document, and they presented it. There are different accounts of the story.
Okay.
Some said that the leaders there still refused, the indigenous leaders still refused, and they were forced to sign because he pulled up his picture and put it to the head of the chief, and said, "You sign it, or we'll blow your head off."
Oh.
So then the chief signed on the directs.
Mm.
There are others that said no, it was a mutual understanding. The chief did sign. Whatever it was, the document was signed.
Okay.
Document was signed. They came back and said, "Well, we got a deed." There was there's still some confusion between people who are interested in Liberian history, even among some historians. There's a school of thought that they could not have signed this thing because they didn't understand the whole concept of fee simple real estate transaction.
Right.
The typical African society, and this is true for all over Africa. They don't sell land,
Right.
because they don't think land should be sold. It's as a communal property.
Communal property.
So you come, they can allocate to you a piece of land, and as long as you conform to the norms of the society and you contribute in a productive manner, you can live there for as long as you want, raise your family there, and you become a part of it.
Okay.
You won't have to pay for anything, the land is yours.
Okay.
but not in the sense of, fee simple, deeded real estate, transaction. If you decide you don't want to be in that community anymore, you go.
Right.
The land revert to the
The
community.
community.
Using that logic, some argue that it is not possible that these Dane people, would have sold it. That it must have been a misunderstanding.
Right.
That when Stockton and these people presented these things that are brought, gunpowder and all the other gifts that are brought,
Right.
and as far as they was concerned, that was payment for the land.
Mm-hmm.
They construe it as payment for the land.
So I know it was a multi-tier entry into Liberia by the African Americans that came from here as free slaves. So the first tier would have been purchase of land, right? Mm-hmm. In a mutual manner that was not forceful. But the second tier would be where there was force involved to take land, where you have Matilda, Newport, and other guys using cannon and stuff like that. Could you elaborate on that aspect?
Sure. So, but just to complete my previous thought. So whereas, and this is one school of thought, whereas these settlers thought they were buying the land because they presented all these gifts.
Okay.
The natives saw it as just presenting gifts as proof that you came
In good faith.
Okay. People do that in the African society. You go to a town or village, you come bearing gifts, they accept your gifts. It's just to say, I come in peace.
Okay.
It's not because they're selling anything to you.
Right.
So some people say that's what the misunderstanding was. Well, there was a deed.
Okay.
There was a thumbprint on it. He comes with the deed, goes back, and said, well, we got the deed now. We own Cape Mazzarato. We can go.
Mm-hmm.
The people up there said, no, wait a minute. Who gave you this land? We didn't give you this land and say, well, we got a deed. We thought we come from your guy over there, your leaders over there, and they signed this deed. And if you understand, the Bassa people, the Dane people, they don't believe too much in monarchy.
Okay.
You're like other tribes,
Right.
where you got one absolute leader.
Right.
And then after that, it passes.
They believe in democracy.
Sort of.
All right.
Yes.
More for communal voice.
And when they set up their community,
Right.
all of the different families are represented. So you have your chief, you got sub chiefs, but you got headmen.
Okay.
Representing the major families. So the headmen to come now and say, but tell their chief, who gave you the authority to go and sell this land? We didn't ask you to do that. So no, these people, you're not taking any land. Yeah, this man don't have the absolute authority to do something that we don't want him to do. The accounts in Liberian history that said chief gets arrested by his people. And then lock him up somewhere and tell the settlers, you're not coming up here. And so they were held up on Providence Island for months.
Okay.
Now you have King King Sabalso. He was from the Mandingo Confederation.
Okay.
So he was the leader of a lot of the land over there. He was very powerful militarily, and apparently he had authority over all these tribes, all the way up to Bourgeois Island and up onto Cape Mazzarato.
Okay.
They were somehow.
So he was more like a de facto governor.
They were under his authority. It may have been an arrangement but these people they had their leaders, but it may have been an arrangement, where, he had some form of military authority over them.
Okay.
But he comes and he set up court.
Okay.
And once he set up court, people come and they bring their cases, and he hears these cases. And the settler seizes the opportunity.
Okay.
And the settlers, they seize the opportunity and go there and say, listen, we got a case. We bought the land for these people.
Okay.
And we got the paperwork for it, but now they're saying we can't possess the land and we here hold up. You know, at some point they wanted to go back. And it was Elijah Johnson, I believe, that's what he's sometimes referred to as the father of the nation, when he made that famous statement that, you know, this is the land of my father. I've forgotten the real quote. And, you know, if I have to die here, I will die here, but I'm not going back.
Mm-hmm.
You know, kind of like the equivalent in American history of give me liberty or give me peace.
Mm.
You know, give me liberty or give me death.
Yeah.
You know, that was how defining that statement was. And so they stayed. But Sabaso, you know, here's the case, reviewed that document, and he determined that the settlers were right. They showed ample proof that they bought the land, and so he ruled that they will possess the land.
Mm. What was the medium of exchange in buying the land? What was exchange for the land?
It was barter during that time. It was barter trading. So, you know, they give you might give you salt, gunpowder, you know, tobacco, stuff like that.
Smoke fish and stuff like that.
Yes.
Okay.
So they still wanted to put up some resistance, and that's when Bolson Sabazo said that if you guys disturb these people and you know, continue to dispossess them of their land, you know, I will take the head of your leader and all of you. He threatened them. Mm. And that was it. After that, the settlers were allowed to come up and they took over Cape Maserado. But that set the stage for the rift between the two groups. That's what people don't understand.
Okay.
So even though they took the land, but you think the natives were satisfied? No, because they didn't like the ruling from this guy, right?
Right.
So they still felt that these people are taking our land with our, you know, our authority. We don't like that. And if you're gonna force them on us, you know, that's fine. We'll make their life a living hell then. And they did. Mm. So the settlers were not just sitting there, you know, and the indigenous people were doing their business. They're doing their business. They just walked in and they just started to fight. No, these people were resistant. There were many occasions where settlements that were built by the settlers that came were attacked by the natives because they didn't want them there. They felt that you wrongfully took our land.
Right.
And we don't like that. You know? And so there were many of these fights. This whole experiment of Liberia, the settlement in Liberia, came very close to extermination.
Explain more.
There were times that they were attacked and almost wiped out.
You mean the settlers?
Yes. The natives would attack them and almost it came close to wiping them out. You know, and so of course they chalked most of that up to, you know, the divine interference of God. They were steadfast in a belief that they stuck together and they fought, you know, they would make it. But it was not a cakewalk. Mm. It was hard. You're talking about a group of people that come into a strange land, can't speak the language, don't know the territory, don't know the culture. You just get the small little place. You got nothing. You're supposed to eke up a living, build a whole community from scratch with your bare hands. Mm. And then you can't get the cooperation from the people around you. Think about it. It's very difficult. How do you go in the bushes to go get sticks to build your little house?
So So, for perspective, Cape Montserrat is pretty much of a huge piece of land, so to speak.
That would be the Monrovia. That would
Monrovia.
be Central Monrovia.
Yeah. So, how much would it have been sold for such a huge piece of land? And besides the settlers went in, they had the backing of the American Colonization Society.
Mm-hmm.
They had arms. They had cannons. So, how do you bridge just buying a piece of land right in Cape Montserrat, which is Montserrat County,
Mm-hmm.
to establishing a political uh, country or society that actually rule the entire country?
Well, what you have to understand is there was no country at the time, and all of these societies were not under one 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 governing system. They were
Okay.
separate and distinct kingdoms,
Okay.
right? So so now you had these new arrivals, these settlers that come in, but they have a different concept of government. They have a concept of democracy, republican form of government, and they understand what expansion is,
Right.
and they understand how you can incorporate territory and then keep expanding and incorporating more people
Okay.
to expand, right? And so, um, so it's up to do that. If you look in Liberian history, they started there and they went from one settlement to another settlement and they bought the land. After what happened with Cape Mazzarato, the natives understood now, oh, okay, so, land can be sold. And if you want to buy it, you can buy it. And so this is it. So if it wasn't clear before, it was clear now.
Yeah.
And so they understood. So they decided to put what they believed were fair market value to the land that it was selling. They did sell land. After that point, land was sold by the natives, and there were money that was raised by the different colonization society. It wasn't just the American colonization society, but there were others, right?
Right.
There was the Maryland Colonization Society. There was the Mississippi Colonization Society. There were different societies. All of them were there raising money in order to repatriate free and manumitted slaves from their community.
Okay.
So, say for example, Edina in Grand Bassa County.
Okay.
Edina was bought. They paid for it. They negotiated with Bob Gray, who was the leader of the indigenous people in that area.
Okay.
That was part of his kingdom. But Bob Gray was very progressive for his time.
Mm.
He didn't just accept gifts. He laid down preconditions, like you must educate my children. He said he understood the importance of kids going to school.
Right.
Then understanding, Western culture. And he understood that a combination of all two. If our children can understand our culture, understand your culture, and all of that, and go to our, traditional school, but go to your school too,
Right.
that would make them,
Well-rounded.
well-rounded. So that was one of his pre-conditions. He was progressive, but they entered into an arrangement. It was mutual. It was mutually beneficial.
Right.
The money for that settlement came from the people of Edinburgh, in England, in Britain. That's why they named it after all the other areas that they have expanded to.
Okay.
There were areas that they incorporated the natives, when they came under the government. They bought, other swaths of land, and they got incorporated. It was not until I believe it was Gardner.
Mm.
It was Gardner, I believe, the continent decided that it was time that they could not survive as a nation if they didn't incorporate the indigenous from in what they called the hinterland at the time.
Okay.
If they didn't incorporate the indigenous in the hinterland and utilize the great resources that existed there.
Okay.
And so he was the one, I believe, in 1880 that established the Department of Interior. We didn't have one. I believe it was Gardner in 1880 that actually did that.
Okay.
And he appointed Edward Wilmer Blyden as Interior Secretary. And that was when he sent Blyden and Benjamin J.K. Anderson made an expedition to go into the interior.
Okay.
Right? And Liberia, and of course, what they were doing was going there and convincing the natives in these places, listen, man, the French are right here. They will enslave your people. They will take your people. It's better you become part of this republic. You remember Liberia was now
a republic.
A republic. Be a part of us where nobody can come and take you now because we are a sovereign nation.
Right.
They can't harass you. They can't take your land. They can't take your children. They can't do any of it. Nobody can take advantage of you. Be a part of it. Otherwise, the French are coming. The Germans are coming. The British are coming. You know, the Portuguese are going to do this to you. You know? And yeah.
So they had to be convinced to be a part.
Yeah.
So now you're expanding your political subdivisions beyond Monrovia and its environs into the different counties now.
Yeah, they were leaving the coast now because remember they had settlements in Kipmount.
Okay.
They had settlement in Bassa.
Okay.
And by 1857, the settlement in Harper on the Maryland coast over there were also a part of Liberia.
Okay.
So you remember now there was settlement all along the coast.
So that they had to negotiate with the inland counties such as Lo-Fi County and
what is Lo-Fi County?
What is Lo-Fi County now?
Yeah, there were parts of Liberia that didn't even become that didn't fully become parts of Liberia until much later.
Much later.
Yeah, and when they came, they were territories. There were territories like Riverses. I'm old enough to know when Riverses wasn't a county, it was a territory attached to Grand Bassa County.
I record it was only 9 counties.
Yeah, and then all the other places were called the Central Region. When they incorporated and Nimba and Bong and Lo-Fi and all of that, they were the Central Territory and all of that, and eventually they became. But yeah, that expansion happened over a period of time.
Right.
For different, under different precedences.
Okay. So we talked about prehistoric Liberia a little. We talked about pre-settlement Liberia. And now we're here now in 1847, where Liberia has a political system in place, a government that's in place. And this government is negotiating with the different parts of Liberia to join for protection, so to speak, so that the government can protect them. That's when you have the 9 counties, the original 9 counties that were in place under the Liberian government. So moving beyond that, just before we move beyond that, can we just let the audience know what was the role of Matilda Newport in this rape, and then we're going to move beyond 1847 and look into other deep areas.
So Matilda Newport, sometimes in the 80s, became a controversial figure. Prior to the 80s, Matilda Newport was seen as a hero, a heroine, as far as the story was told from the quote-unquote Americo-Liberian perspective.
Okay.
It was one of those times when the Americo-Liberians and the settlement got almost totally wiped out, and this thing we call Liberia today would not have been. The natives had surrounded the settlement, they attacked them, and what people don't understand, I think you brought that up and you said, but these settlers, they had guns and all of that, the natives had guns also.
Oh, okay.
They did.
From the battle systems.
Yeah. You remember when they came in, they will give them gunpowder. And when they were trading, they would be giving them gunpowder, they would give them gunshots, they had guns.
So there was stark resistance from the indigenous population that these new guys were encroaching on their territory, and rightfully so.
If you see, if that was one of the reasons, that they felt, all right, we didn't give you this land, and the way that you got it, well, maybe that's not the way we thought. But this guy came and said, you're right, you got that right, and we're wrong. Okay, so maybe legally you can consider that, but I don't mean we liked it or we're going to cooperate with you or whatever.
Right.
And then when you start to mess around with the trade, you want to impose taxes on them that they feel we've been doing this thing for 100 years. Who are you to come and make us pay taxes to we're not going to do it? And Liberian government feel we have to impose that. Or they got the slave, depot and docks and thing, and they're doing that thing, and the Liberian authority feel that it is one of the objectives, of the government to get rid of all of that stuff, and so they're destroying it. And so you feel that you're messing with my money. And so for all these reasons, there was conflict.
Right.
And then and then there were some bad actors, among the natives too, who would see the camp and see people doing that, and they think they can organize raids and come and raid the place and take stuff. And so they would raid and they would take stuff and go. That was very prevalent in the West, where you have, Bummy, where you have Bummy and Lower Lofa, and all of that, yeah. So, but back to the point that you were making, that you talked about, in 1847, when they had the whole thing set up, they gradually started to develop and incorporate these different, these different groups. They started to incorporate them, and then they started with counties, the original 3 counties, and then they went to 7 counties, and then they started to expand.
Okay. Pretty interesting. So we're going to take a quick break here, and we will actually get back and talk about post 1847. All right, so let's talk about Liberia post 1847, being the very first country on the continent of Africa that became independent, an independent nation that didn't come easily. It came with a lot of fights. The country became independent against the will of the indigenous people, so to speak, but eventually incorporated out of the subdivision, the other counties, and Liberia became one country. So Liberia was founded, for lack of a better word, on the concept of one division, two, sort of an occupation that was not welcomed by the natives, and the intention for the Americo-Liberians going back to Liberia was, number one, a land of liberty where they could actually have a voice as compared to being slaves in the U.S. and the Caribbean and other places that they came from. And when they went to Liberia, they met resistance. They bought land and they set up a political system that today became Liberia. So let's talk about post 1847 Liberia. So my first question along those lines would be, we understand that the indigenous folks were not allowed to vote, and citizenship was only granted as early as 1904, and voting rights were extended in 1951 for indigenous Liberians to vote. Now, this is
Women.
You mean Liberian women? Yes, for Liberian women to vote. So you're talking about over 50 years of the political system being in place, but the indigenous Liberians were not allowed to vote. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah. But first, I I wouldn't consider the settlers to be an occupying force. Because everything that I said, where they came, they believed they bought the land, and then they bought other lands. So it wasn't an imposition. They paid for it. There were confusion, so of course there were resistance. And then when they started to interfere with the trade that the natives were involved in, of course that caused resistance. And then when you try to impose taxes and all of that on people that they feel is undue, you know, especially if they feel that they have taxation without representation. You know, the Americans went to war for it too against the British. You can't tax me, and I'm not represented. So those are some of the causes of conflict. But I wouldn't consider the Liberians to be an occupying force in that manner. Now, those that didn't join the Republic of Liberia, right?
Okay.
You know what happened to them?
No.
They got occupied.
Okay, let's talk about that.
They got occupied. Guinea didn't get its independence until when a wave of independence came for French colonists. You know, around the late 1850s to the 1860s, right?
Okay.
That was when Guinea gained their independence. Liberia's territory in Guinea extended all the way into Masadu. That's way into Guinea today.
Okay.
But the French took all of that and came all the way to Foya and ended there, and to where the Nimba Range is, you know, and along the border with Nimba County now. Liberian territory also included the Galanas territory. That's all the land between Shepherd River and Shepherd River in what is present day Sierra Leone,
Okay.
and all the way into Ivory Coast.
Okay. So you're talking about
Today-
the Berlin Conference.
Today, the whole Galanas area
Mm-hmm.
is part of Sierra Leone. They were occupied by the British. They didn't get their independence until much later. They brought the border all the way down to the Mana River and ended it there. Taboo. All the way into Ivory Coast. All that territory, that taboo territory, was a part of Liberia. Of course, you know, they moved the border all the way back. So all those people, for all those years, when Liberians were free, the natives were doing things. Coming to America, going to school. A lot of them were being educated even in Liberia. Those people were colonized. They were having all kinds of troubles that the indigenous Liberians that were part of Liberia, everybody that was in Liberia didn't have. That Liberia didn't have. This is not to say that we didn't have our own share of problems in Liberia. Yes, there were discrimination, there was segregation, you know, all of those things existed. And you're right about, you know, denying people the right to vote. When you start to set, you know, criteria like you have to be a property owner, or you can only vote if you were a man, you know, and all of that. Restricting the rights of indigenous people. All of those things did exist. All of those things. There were natives that fought back, like Joan Nimble, and got killed because he was fighting for his rights and for the rights of his people when they were importing, you know, what I agree with Joan Nimble was undue taxes. You putting hot tax and all these things on these people, you know, when they weren't getting the benefits of it, you know, and they fought back. So those things existed within the context of this republic. But in occupying force, no, that was the fate of those that actually didn't join Liberia.
So just to solidify this point, if we kind of compare what happened in Liberia with what happened in Gaza, what happened to the Palestinians in Gaza when Israelis repatriated there, also doing the same thing, buying land, and eventually set up a political system there in 1945, I believe, right after the Second World War, and began to create a political system that, so to speak, ostracized the natives there as well. How do you blur the line between the two picture? And of course, there's an argument that there is occupation in Gaza, absolutely. And if you occupy a land, or say you occupy a house where you were given a room, and you set up a political system in that house and became uh, the person who determines how that house is run, like what happened in Liberia. Others may argue that yes, the country was occupied, and against the will of the people, they set up a political system. And there was disparity where the indigenous were not involved in the political system and didn't have any voice for their own well-being, including voting, which only happened in 1904, from 1847 to 1904. So if you're part of a political system and you're under the Liberian government, and you're Maryland, you're Cape Mau County, Grand Bassa County, but you don't have a right to vote for many, many years, from 1847 to 1904. Um, how do you explain that, and say that it was not an occupied, um, you know?
So let's use the Gaza comparison.
Okay.
Without any empirical evidence, I can say to you confidently today that at least about 95% of all the land in Liberia is owned by the quote-unquote indigenous population.
Absolutely.
How is that how is that an occupation?
It's an occupation in a sense, and I'm just putting out a debate. I'm not making a solid, because I'm asking questions, right? It can be considered an occupation because you have political rights. You have the right to impose taxes. You have the right to seize property. You have the right to sign deeds in all of those subdivisions that the government assumed power over. So even though the land is owned by the indigenous, the power do not belong to them when it comes to political decision making. Uh, and within the same vein, you're not allowed to vote until after several years, maybe up to 100 years, before you even had a chance to vote.
I
But
agree.
yet still you're under a political system.
I agree with you. That was a horrible system. And so the our indigenous brothers and sisters that fought back today, some of them are, and those that are not, they should be recognized as heroes and heroines. They're Liberian heroes and heroines. They didn't just fight for themselves, they fought for all of us today. For whatever rights that we enjoy today, they fought for it. Some of them put their lives on the line. I mentioned Dwa Nimla, Madam Swakoko.
Mhm.
And there were some that didn't actually pick up arms, but through their wisdom, through the astuteness of the negotiation skills, their diplomacy, you know, they fought too. You know, Bob Gray, you know, Long Peter, and all these different people, you know, they contributed. Yes, I think Liberia would have been a much, much, much better country had the native population hadn't been so discriminated against, and that they were allowed full involvement into the governance system. The other thing that I'll argue uh, all the time is we imported a system
Okay.
We imported the system
Western
from
system.
America.
Okay.
That never worked for us. The reason we were going to Liberia anyway was because this system didn't work for us. And most of the people that decided they were going to go to Liberia, they knew that because of the color of the skin, they would never reach the fullness of the potential because they would not be allowed to. They would not be allowed to get educated. They would not be allowed, you know, to hone, practice, and benefit from their God-given gifts and talent. They would not be allowed to own property and benefit from it. None of that. And they felt if we wanted, dignity, reach the fullness of our potential and all of that, we need to get out of here. The mistake is you get out of here, but you import the same system that held you down.
Yeah.
So, and one of the reasons could be psychological. That's all they knew.
That's all they knew.
They didn't know anything else. That one. And two, maybe the tables have turned. Even if we establish this system, well, we're not going to be the victim of it. If anybody's going to be the victim of it, it's going to be other people.
Okay.
Not us. So with that mindset, you can do it. And yes, did the indigenous people become victim of that system? Yes, they did. Sometimes it is overblown. And a lot of people overblow it for political aims.
Okay.
People do it. You see every election cycle, you will see here this quote-unquote Congo native thing, they'll come up. They'll come up. A lot of the people that talk about it, especially during such times, they're not sincere. They never took the time to understand the history of Liberia. They're doing it because they want to gin up negative passion within the indigenous population against one group, right? So, but did these excesses happen? They did.
Okay.
But go back. You will see president after president, and you will see record after record that show attempts, and in some cases successful attempts to integrate the native population. The truth is, there wasn't a wholesale attempt to do it. It was done
In pockets.
scantily.
Okay.
And imagine, my argument as always is, imagine if you had developed a hybrid system that incorporated the best of the indigenous culture and governance system with the best of the Western system that you knew and you brought, and create this fusion, this new system. I think Liberia would have been better off today. I make the point, if you go to our villages and towns, there are no prisons. You just go way back.
No prisons.
They didn't have prisons. But they have better law and order than most organized Western society. How is that?
Yeah.
Maybe there's something we can learn from.
Absolutely.
How is that? When they were not selling land and doing all of this thing, but their communities were peaceful, law-abiding, clean, and all of that. There were things to be learned from that. There were attempts to do that. Gardner wanted to know what was happening over there, hopefully learn from it. Blinding. After he made a trip, if you read his book that he and Anderson wrote, Journey to Masado, he had a glowing appraisal of the indigenous people that he met there. He talked about how unbelievably organized their systems were.
So a hybrid system would have been much, much better.
I would think so. I don't know what form it would have taken. 'Cause I don't know.
It would have taken a form of acceptance. That's what I think. So it would look beyond 1847 and go back to the Fernando scandal in 1930 under Charles D.B. King, where the League of Nations actually investigated forced labor allegations. Indigenous workers were recruited for plantations in Spanish territories. Investigation found the conditions resembling slavery, and that particular scandal forced Charles D.B. King to resign. So the government of Liberia was involved in slavery during their rule in 1930, which is documented. Can we speak to that?
That would not be a completely accurate statement to say the government of Liberia was involved.
The President Charles D.B. King
Yes.
resigned because of that.
True.
Okay.
So, and that too, there was some, it's if you go through the full report, the report itself didn't fully accuse King of slavery. There were accounts that people were forcibly taken. There were other accounts that they were promised a certain level of payments, and those payments were not made. Okay. There were accounts that they were coerced. There were accounts that they were deceived. But so a case could be made. I'm not gonna defend any
position. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
What I'm gonna
I guess it's a question of why did he resign in the midst of this scandal?
Yes.
Yeah.
So there were wrongdoings there
Under his governance.
by him and his co-conspirators, right? I am certain, from oral accounts, that there were people that were taken forcibly. That would be slavery, right?
Yeah.
They were taken over there, although they were not treated in a manner that they were treated here, but they were subjected to labor over there. They were paid a certain sum of money, and a lot of them
they benefited from it. Government officials benefited from the trade.
Of course.
Under his...
Because the powers over there were asking them to supply labor over there, and of course they benefited financially. These people benefited from it.
So not only that, a political system was set up, but political system was set up.
Do you know how the whole thing came about?
No. Elaborate on it.
The whole thing came about because of the political opponent of King.
Okay.
The guy who was running against King when King was running for re-election.
Okay.
All right? And remember, King is in the Guinness Book of World Record for conducting the most fraudulent elections
in all of history.
Yes. Now, his opponent lost, but then, he decided, well, I know stuff about you, and we'll bring you down. So there was some political motivation there too.
Yeah.
You can't discount that.
Yeah.
All right? And so the investigation went and all of that. They presented their findings. But King had lost respect and favor with the ruling establishment. He couldn't, in any sensible, productive manner, continue, and he was going to get impeached. And so he resigned. So, bad thing happened. The silver lining is, give credit to the people who said, we will impeach you for this. We were not part of it. You and your boys, you decided to do this. You benefited from it. The majority of the ruling, the people here in this government, in the legislature, we didn't benefit from it. We're not part of it. And now we got proof that there was wrongdoing on your part. We'll impeach you. So he resigned. But you will see that, though, unlike what it is in Liberia today. I don't know if you remember the phrase "so say one, so say all." That they started in top one time. that was when the legislature and the other branches of government lost all relevance because everything was being dictated by this imperial president, right? If he said it, everybody agreed. That wasn't always the case.
So there was no intent to unite. Key point. There was no real intent to unite with the indigenous population for many years that gave rise.
When you say unite, elaborate. What do you
like the hybrid system we spoke about before, incorporating those systems of governance, having the indigenous having political will or having any political say after 1847, where the indigenous were excluded, so to speak, from any political seats. Coming down to the Chewy party, where there was just one party system, where elections were held in people's living rooms in Monrovia or in Montserrat County to elect superintendent for a person who is should be superintendent or senator for Grand Bassa County. That sort of hegemony was pretty close. It was a closed political system that did not involve those other territories, those counties that were under the Liberian government.
Well, here's what I'm going to say about that. Elections were held nationally. So there's the part that is the legal part.
But voting wasn't allowed until 1904.
No, I get what you're saying. That people were disenfranchised and they didn't have the right to vote. That was true. But I'm making a comment now on those who had a right to vote, how the voting was. Liberia, I know there are people who always said Liberia always had a one-party system. That is not true. The Chewy party itself came into existence as a result of opposition to the ruling party.
And what was the ruling party?
The Republican Party.
Okay.
Roberts and all these guys, they were members of the Republican Party. Remember, and there were policy disagreement, and I get there was some cultural tension between them too, between light-skinned and dark-skinned settlers, even amongst themselves.
There was disparity amongst themselves.
There were friction between the two groups based on colorism, right? And then also based on policy differences. And so one group decided that they were going to go and form their own party. Now, the group that went to form his own party, they were originally members of the Republican Party, right? They met in Clay Ashland and they put this party together. The two people that got elected for the new party, one of them was the Secretary of Finance.
Okay.
With the Secretary of the Treasury. So he had the Treasury Secretary forming a party against the president. I just tell you, these were not guys that were puppets, that were just controlled by the president. No. If they had disagreement with the president, they spoke openly about it and they opposed him, openly they stood on their own 2 feet because they didn't need the largesse of the president. Now you remember Roy was the Secretary of the Treasury at the time. He was one of the original leaders of the Chewy Party. He got elected the standard bearer of the Chewy Party at that time. The Secretary of State, Dr. James Scriven Smith, opposed his party at the time and was at that meeting to form the new party.
The Chewy Party.
Yes, he got elected the vice standard bearer of the Chewy Party on that day. That's how they formed the Chewy Party. Now you have the Secretary of the Treasury and the Secretary of State becoming the standard bearer and the vice standard bearer of a new political party that was formed now to run against their old party. That's how the Chewy Party got founded. And Roy and Smith became the first two to run on the Tory party ticket against Roberts and the Republicans.
Okay.
Of course, the whole Roy episode happened. They accused Roy of stuff. Roy tried to raise the presidential term. Remember, the presidential term was only 2 years.
Mm.
That's how much these people didn't want, to anybody, to be corrupt and perpetuate themselves in power.
Right.
But it was too short. We all know. And Roy tried to increase it to 4. These guys were waiting for the 2 years to be over, so the Republicans were waiting so they can come and take over.
Right.
And now you want to add another 2 more years. They didn't like that. And there were other things that didn't like it. And the way Roy handled the situation, the way he handled the legislative part of it, trying to force this legislation, to pass, so that they could increase the presidential term to 4 years. They created, a lot of controversy and divisions and all of that. The Republicans seized the opportunity, arrest Roy, imprison him. Roy escapes. And now Roy was a ship owner. He owned ships that were sailing and carrying goods across the Atlantic. So you're talking about these are guys that were very, very wealthy. Mm. He was trying to make it, because remember, we didn't have a port where you could come and dock there. Mm. So the ship would stay way out on sea, and you have to take a canoe and go to it. Mm. He was escaping and going when they realized that he was escaping, and they came over there and fired volleys of the cannon. The ship capsized, they dragged Roy back on the shore, and the account that I read was that Roy was actually beaten to death. Mm. He was beaten, and he died of his wounds. You know where they got the Egypt Road building there today? Right. That's where they dragged him on shore and they beat him. Mm. Right.
That's not far from the Dew River. Egypt Road building.
Egypt Road building right on Ashmore Street.
Right.
Yeah. So, and the True Party built that building as a monument to Roy, because that's where
there was this monument there at the building as well.
The building itself is a monument to Egypt Road. I'll tell you this: nobody would know who Roy was today if not for that building. Mm. That's why nobody knows who his vice president was. Mm. Nobody, and the guy who took over and became president after him. James Kirkland Smith, nobody knows who that is. Nobody knows who Garrison Gibson is. Nobody. Coleman. Without Coleman Cheeseman that left office and came back and tried to run again. Mm. So all along.
All of that was in the Constitution.
Huh?
All of those were in the Constitution.
Because the Constitution didn't prevent anybody from establishing a political party and running against the true party. That's what I said. I will agree with you that in practice, it was kind of like a one-party system because no other party managed to get strong enough to compete with the True Party. But there was no law that prevented it.
Right.
But it was culture and practice that ensured that happened. So, yes, in practice, I would agree.
Great. So, we're talking about political involvement of all of Liberia that didn't take place. We have disparity between indigenous Liberians